tonight. And Ann and I used to live north of Nashwauk, and when we first bought the property, we fenced in just one little section of our property. And we had two horses, one named Smokey and one named Amby. And they were king of that little pasture. You know, they were together, co-reigners. Not like reigning, but kings of their pasture. And then we went and we got another horse named Ben. And we put Ben into that pasture with those two, with Smokey and Amby. And Ben got the bejeepers beat out of him because he was the new horse, and the other two thought that he was an interloper and an intruder and all sorts of problems for Ben. Well, we hurried up in the next couple of days. We got the rest of our pasture done, and we put Ben in the big pasture by himself for a few days. And when we turned Smokey and Amby out into the big pasture with Ben, all of a sudden Ben was now the king. It was really interesting. He had been the one who was getting beat up. Now they left him alone and he was boss. If you ever watch horses in a pasture, there will be fights to see who's going to be king, who's going to be the alpha horse in the pasture. Most of the times, it's going to be an alpha mare. She's going to be the one to put all the other ones into their places. When I was in college, at the end of college, I applied to go on a missions trip with our denomination, and we got chosen to go to the Philippines. And before school was over, at school we had what was called, let's see here, not going to work, a foot washing service. Now that isn't any of us, but that is what it would look like. You'd have some people with their shoes off, and you would have some other people coming by to wash their feet. And it was to remind us that we were going to serve the people that we were going to minister to in the country we were going to. There was lots of different countries that were represented at this foot washing service. And it follows the example that Jesus gave us in John 13 when he washed the feet of his disciples. But I'll be honest with you, of everything that happened to me before, during, and after that missions trip, this was the least favorite part of the missions trip for me. If I could have gracefully been gone that day at chapel when they decided they were going to wash people's feet, I would have called in sick or whatever I could have done to get out of it. Not because I don't want to be a servant. That's not at all. Not because I didn't want to wash the feet of the people next to me. No, it's because I didn't want someone washing my feet. And how, uncomfortable that was. And, a semi-stranger taking off your shoes and socks and washing your feet. And most people, from what I hear, feel the same kind of way. Not about washing the feet of someone else, but about having their own feet washed. And in the story that we look at today, Peter objected to that too. He didn't want Jesus washing his feet, but Jesus was teaching his disciples a lesson about himself, some lessons about themselves, and some lessons about how they were to relate to one another and the world around them. So we're going to take a closer look at that tonight in John 13. And we normally think of this story as kind of an illustration of the type of servant attitude that we're to have towards one another. And it certainly is that, but there are some other things, some other truths that I want to look at tonight to kind of maybe spread a little bit different light on it, a little bit deeper meaning maybe. And one of the problems we have in our day and age is that maybe we don't really understand the significance of Jesus' actions, because in our culture today, there's really not kind of a fill-in for that in our culture. In the days of the New Testament, the roads to Palestine, the roads of Palestine were unpaved and dusty and unclean, and sandals were the typical footwear, not cowboy boots or tenders or whatever. So they wore sandals. And it was inevitable that when you walked anywhere, your feet were going to get dirty, that you were going to have filthy feet. And the rest of you might be clean, but your feet were going to be caked with dirt and mud and grime and everything else that you can think of. And for that reason, there was usually, as you entered the home, in the entry of each home, large water pots. And a servant would come with a large pitcher and a towel, and he would wash your feet when you got into the home. A person didn't feel embarrassed about having his feet washed when he entered the home of a friend because it was a common act of hospitality. Like if you go to your friend's house and take your shoes off, it'd be the same kind of thing. In our day and age, it's taking your shoes off, but in their day and age, they wash their feet. It was also the act of a slave. It would be inconceivable that you went to a friend's house, and as you stood in the entry, he would greet you with, "Hello, how are you? It's good to see you." And you and he might have kind of some banter back and forth, some of that small talk. And the slave would be doing the washing of your feet while all that was going on. And you wouldn't notice, or you wouldn't at least acknowledge that the slave was doing that. That's how it was back then. So on the night of the Last Supper, when Jesus got up from the table, from the meal, he took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, and he poured water in a basin, and he began washing their feet. And the disciples, of course, were surprised because he wasn't acting like their master, he was acting like a slave. Now, imagine if you were to go to work one day and your boss called you in, and all the other employees into the conference room or somewhere, and he came in with a brush and a rag and some shoe polish, and he began shining everybody's shoes. That would be kind of what we would look at. That would be a little surprising if your boss did that for you. That gives you kind of an idea of how the disciples must have, what the disciples must have thought, what they must have felt as Jesus washed their feet. Why did Jesus do that? And as I looked at the story, three things came to the surface. And when he washed their feet, Jesus was communicating kind of a certain spiritual truth to his disciples. And since we are his disciples as well, we need to kind of take these truths in and apply them in our lives as well. So the first lesson in the story is this. Jesus wants you to know the full extent of his love. Now those aren't my words. They're John's words. In verse 1, it was before the Passover feast, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. And then it says that he washed their feet. And Jesus came to be a servant. In Matthew 20:28, it says, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." And yeah, he has called us to serve him. That's grand, that's a given. We preach about it a lot, what we need to do for Christ, what we need to do for God. But I want you to realize where the process begins in all of this. It begins with Jesus came to serve us. He came to minister to us. He came to meet our needs. He came to fill the void in our lives. He came to take away the pain and sorrow and guilt and frustration and replace that with the peace that passes all understanding. Jesus came for us to serve us. The most obvious example of this is in Philippians chapter 2, where Paul wrote he had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave. He became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death, and the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. You see, Jesus' life here on earth was all about serving others. He came to serve, and even to this day, he still serves us. Now, we might be taken aback by that and say, well, what do you mean he still serves us? We serve him. And yeah, that's true. We serve him. We're called to live a life of service to Him and to others, but I want you to understand what comes first tonight. Before you can be a service to anyone else, you have to first have the experience of Him serving you, blessing you, ministering to you, saving you. When the book, The Prayer of Jabez, first came out, a lot of people had problems with it because the first line of that prayer is, Lord, bless me indeed. And so a lot of people thought that that was a prayer for those who were materialistic or needy or greedy or whatever. And so they would say, well, you can't pray that prayer because you're asking God to bless you and all that kind of stuff. And the fact is, if you've ever tried it, you know this is true. You can't give away what you don't have. You can't give to others or give back to God what you don't have, what you haven't received. You can't be a blessing until you are blessed. You can't give away God's love until you have received God's love. You can't pour out your life for others until God has poured His life into you. And for that reason, Jesus came to serve and He came to minister. So what do you need from Him? If He's serving, if He's ministering, how can He help you? Well, do you need a friend who loves you, who accepts you as you are, who forgives your mistakes and encourages you to try again? Jesus came to be that kind of a friend. Do you need strength of character, a stronger will? Do you need healing emotionally or physically? He came to be that for you. The full extent of God's love for you is that Jesus Christ came into this world to serve others. And that includes you and I. If you have some residual pride or some residual guilt that causes you to say, no, I can't accept the idea that Jesus came to serve me, then I want you to notice the next thing we see in the story. And that is number 2. There is no other model for the Christian life. Jesus washed the disciples' feet that night, and when he got to Peter, Peter objected, no, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. And then of course Peter, like he always does, he goes overboard. He says, well, then don't just wash my feet, wash everything. And the point here is, if you don't allow Jesus to wash your feet, to minister to you, to meet your needs, you can't be part of His kingdom. The defining element of the Christian life is not what we do for Him. The defining element of the Christian life is what He has done and continues to do for us. I heard a man talking a while back about his ministry. He said this, he said, I do all the work, God gets all the glory. And the statement got a round of applause from the people he was talking to, but you know what? That's not how it really works. If you think that you're going to do everything for God, that you'll be a big help for His cause and an indispensable player on His team, you're headed for a heartache. That's not the model for the Christian to follow. That's not how it works. We don't come to God with our plate full of what we're doing for Him and then bless Him with some of our stuff. We don't come to Him and then bless Him from the abundance of our strength and our goodness and our talents and our gifts and our abilities. No, we come to Him with our plate empty, with nothing good to offer. He says, here, let me wash you, let me cleanse you, let me take away the dirt of the past, let me make you clean inside and out, let me serve you, let me help you. And then He says, this is the only way, unless I wash you, you have no part of me. The phrase, unless I wash you, isn't referring only to forgiveness or salvation, because Jesus says in verse 10, a person who has a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And if he's speaking symbolically here, then he's talking about salvation. But when he says to Peter, unless I wash you, you have no part with me, he's referring to the daily, ongoing relationship that we have with Him in which He ministers to us. He's referring to the totality of His involvement in your life. That's the only way it can be. We come to Him dirty, He makes us clean. We come to Him weak, He makes us strong. We come to Him empty, and He fills us up. And there's some of us here tonight maybe that are frustrated by the failure in Christian life. You've tried to get on God's good side by being better than you can be, but it doesn't work. You've tried to win points with God by doing Him favors. But God isn't asking us for favors. You say, well, I'll give some money, I'll give some time, I'll do some good deeds, I'll help others, I'll do all the work, and God will get all the glory. And wanting to glorify God with what you do is the right idea, but you've got to start in the right place. You've got to let Christ minister to you. You've got to let Him feed your soul and strengthen your spirit. You've got to let Him meet your needs and wash away your sins and take away your hurts. You've got to let Him serve you. And you've got to do that first, every day. That's really the only model for successful Christian living. That means we've got to let go of the idea that we can come to God with brilliant words and ideas and praise and powerful deeds of service. And those things will happen, but only if on a consistent basis we come to Him first empty-handed and allow Him to minister to us. There's an old song that says, "Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling." See, we can't give Him anything because He has it all. But then He gives us what we need to do what He asks us to do. Thirdly, He wants you to follow His example of servant leadership. Verse 12, when He had finished washing the disciples' feet, He put on His clothes and returned to His place. "Do you understand what I have read to you?" He asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." There was a guy who lived in an apartment building, and when you live in an apartment, I guess, my cousin and I lived in an apartment together. This kind of seems true. You get into the habit of taking your trash. I even do this at home sometimes. You get in the habit of taking your trash and just setting it by the door so that when you go out again, you bring it out. Usually I just walk right by it and Ann says, "Hey, you forgot the trash." Or she carries it out when she goes out. But what happens a lot of times is you set the trash by your apartment door, and then when you go out to your car or whatever, because the dumpster is often a long ways away when you're in an apartment, you grab the trash and you carry it out there, right? So that's what this guy had done. And one day this guy his boss came to his home. And they talked for a few minutes, and then after he left, the guy looked at his front door and he saw that his trash bag was gone. And he thought, well, that's weird. And so he went and he looked out the window, and there was his boss carrying his bag of trash across the parking lot, away from his car, to the dumpster, opened up the dumpster, threw it in, closed it, and then went back to his car and got his car and drove away. This guy's first thought was, he shouldn't be taking out my trash, I should be taking out his trash, he's my boss. And then his second thought was, you know what, this is completely consistent with who my boss is. This is who he is. He had a way of serving his employees, of looking out for them, of taking care of them, and through his example of how he treated his employees learned how to serve the customer. When Rock Hudson first came to Hollywood, his agent took him out to an expensive restaurant. And after the meal, Rock Hudson put his knife and fork on the plate, covered it with a napkin, and kind of stacked everything up to make it easier for the waiter. And his agent scolded him, "You're not a busboy, you're a Hollywood star. Learn to act like one." And I think Jesus would say just the opposite. You are not a star, you're a servant. Learn to act like one. Practice being one. And then he would say, you can follow my example. I showed you what it was like. I look after you, I serve you, I minister to you, I meet your needs. I do this for you so that you will be empowered and gifted to do it for others. There is no better way to lead and influence people than to serve them. That's our model of servant leadership, that we share with others the fullness that God has put into our lives. And as the saying goes, you may have heard this before, we are blessed to be a blessing. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, and he symbolically wants to wash our feet as well. And I want to encourage you to let him. Let him serve you. Let him minister to you. Let him give you what you need. experience the fullness of His love for you, for there is no other model for successful Christian living. You come to Him empty, you go away full. And everything that He pours into your life, you're then able to pour into the lives of others. You serve them because Christ served you. That's how we put into practice the spiritual truth we learn in the story of Jesus washing His disciples' feet. Let's pray. Father God, we thank You for the example Your Son set for us and for the lessons that we can learn. And Father, I pray that each of us would really make a conscious decision to allow You to serve us and to fill us for what You want us to do. Empower us for that service that You have for us. Help us not to come to You with all these great and mighty things that we want to do for You, but help us to come to You for what You want to give us so that we can pour out for others. We just ask, God, that You would be honored and glorified in our lives as we serve the way You serve us. In Jesus' name.